So different cultures experience emotions differently. Specifically, if we're talking about an individualist culture as opposed to a collective culture. Now, our culture is an individualistic culture. I mean, we're told in our culture to keep your eyes on your own work and take care of yourself. Yeah. So, as opposed to, say, other cultures that are more collective. Now, I make a lot of references to the Amish, but the Amish would be considered a collective culture. And when terms of emotions, there are some emotions that are more common or more acceptable because, as I suggested in the previous lecture, biologically, emotions are all very similar, but cultures tell us which emotions are desirable and which emotions are undesirable. For instance, like some cultures who are more like there are what we refer to as socially engaging emotions as opposed to socially disengaging emotions. Socially engaging emotions are those that turn us towards each other, right? So emotions, ironically enough, like guilt and sympathy are considered to be socially engaging. Guilt is something that when we feel guilty because we've forgotten our mother's birthday, we may call our mother, we may do something nice to her, we turn towards our mother out of this negative emotion, right? Or empathy or things like this, we turn towards each other, as opposed to socially disengaging emotions, which are more common in individualistic cultures like pride, right? Pride in our culture is you're supposed to feel pride. You're supposed to feel good about your accomplishments. But pride is considered a socially disengaging because when I'm feeling good about myself, I'm not turning towards other people. In fact, I'm turning away from other people. And that's why pride in the Amish traditions is considered bad. You're not supposed to experience pride because you're less likely to turn towards the group. When you feel pride for something you've accomplished, you're saying, I'm better than you, right? But our culture, an individualistic culture, tells us we're supposed to feel pride. We're always supposed to be proud of ourselves, right? That kind of thing. So it's kind of an interesting way to think about which our culture's assessment of our different emotions. Also on this slide, you have some pictures of bodies. I don't know if yours is black and white or color, but they're intended to illustrate blood flow as it runs throughout the body systems and how emotions, how we label this physiological state. So, for instance, negative emotion, or there I go, emotions like anger may or limit the blood flow away from our appendages, or fear. So when we're experiencing something we call fear, often our hands are cold, our feet are cold, maybe we're a little bit lightheaded. And this is simply a picture of what's happening biologically, and that's the blood's flowing away from the extremities to the heart to prepare us to fight or flee, right? All those major muscle groups. And that's really all that picture is, just kind of a cool picture. Our culture also gives us rules. It tells us what your textbook calls display rules. And display rules are the guidelines about how we're allowed or expected to express ourselves emotionally. We have different rules associated with private and public settings, associated with gender and social class. For instance, boys, right? Boys are given more prerogative to be aggressive and violent. Girls are given more opportunities or more permission to be emotional or cry in public, right? That's what we mean by display rules. There's also rules about our social rank. For instance, your boss can yell at you, can be angry at you, can show that anger at you, but you can't be angry at your boss. Or if you are, you can't express that to your boss in public. You have to wait and do that at home with your roommate, right? So that's what we mean by public and private. That you have to. I have a lot of my friends on Facebook talking about how they're ugly crying, right now that they're at home and they're tearful, but when they go out in public, they're going to be strong. That's what we mean by public and private. The next slide is about some theories of evolution. And they each have different names associated with whoever came up with them. It's not important that you remember the names, but I want you to understand how they're different and how they're the same. They're the same because they all of these theories use those three elements: what I see, how I interpret what I see, how I think about what I see, how my body responds, and then how I label and therefore act, right? All three elements: the subjective, the physiological, and the behavioral. And so, for instance, you have one theory on here that says you see it, your body reacts, and you label it as fear. And then you respond, right, with what the cultural rules are about fear. You have another theory that says you see it, your body reacts, and you label it as fear at the same time. Those two things happen simultaneously. And then finally, you have a third theory that says I see it, my body reacts, I say, oh, I'm feeling fear. And this is how I'm supposed to act when I feel fear. That's the third one. It's just, the idea here is that all of the theories that explain emotions have the same pieces, but we've just put them in a slightly different order. And I would not ask you to name those theories, but it is important. I will ask you to know what those three elements are. And that's subjective, cognitive, what you think, how your body responds, the biological reaction, and then your behavioral or your display rules or your emoting. Most of the time when people on the streets talk about emotions, they're talking about the emoting. How do you yell? Do you cry? They're not probably talking about what's going on inside. The last couple slides on here, these are really just for fun. Some of the research on happiness. Now is an interesting time to be talking about or to thinking about what makes you happy. And what I cannot forget is one of the hallmarks that runs through happiness is social interaction. And right now, all of our social interaction is being limited. So for people that have a very high need for social interaction, this could be a really challenging time. Fortunately, we have systems like this, and a lot of my church friends, we're having church now via Zoom, and it is surprisingly fun, right? Because that is our way of social interaction. But things that are not correlated with happiness, money, right? There's actually a correlation with happiness that goes up to about $70,000 a year. In other words, so as income continues to increase, income goes up, happiness goes up right along with it until you get to about $70,000, $80,000. Then income can continue to rise, but happiness actually levels off. A better way to think about that is not that money buys happiness, but lack of money buys misery. When you don't have enough, you will be unhappy. But once you have enough, having more than enough doesn't make you exponentially more happy. That's the key. A couple other important concepts on that particular slide is something called effective forecasting. I think I do, in fact, ask you a question about effective forecasting. This is a fancy way of saying predicting how something's going to make you feel. And basically, we're bad at it. We overestimate how good something is going to make us feel. We also overestimate how bad something is going to make us feel. I suspect a month ago, if we would have been told that you all have to stay at home and can't go anywhere, we would have thought, oh my gosh, I'm going to be miserable. And I would also guess that some of us are doing okay, right? That we thought it would be worse than it really is. That's what effective forecasting says. Hedonic adaptation, I love that word. It's based on the root word of hedonism. Hedonic adaptation simply says we get used to things, we get used to bad things, and we get used to good things. Things get really good, we get used to it, we want more. Things are bad, and we're surprisingly capable of adapting. Humans are incredibly resilient. We get used to the bad stuff, and we get used to the good stuff. And then I'm just going to let you guys read the rest of it. That's really mostly just for fun. Just remember to do the best you can right now. Try to get your rest and find humor. And I know myself, I've had to quit watching the news. And I love the news, but I've had to quit watching it and spend more time looking for humor. This ends this chapter.